right, everyone, welcome back to another 40 Under 40 Public Health Catalyst Award winner show. We have another guest with us, Madeline Morcelle. Madeline, I'm not going to do you a disservice. I will have you introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Madeline Morcelle. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a senior attorney at the National Health Law Program, where I focus on promoting reproductive health equity and justice in Medicaid eligibility and non-discrimination policy. It's really lovely to be connecting with you, Dr. Carpenter.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, so we're so excited to get to know you. I know we haven't had too many lawyers in the cohort of the 40 Under 40. And so as some may know, the Boston Congress of Public Health, we seek to showcase those who are doing great things within public health and social justice, but from for a variety of different industries and sectors, and not just the traditional public health that people might think of. But Madeline, to start off with, describe what got you interested in the work that you're doing, the public health aspects, the things about Medicaid and reproductive justice.
Yeah, so, I don't know that I can name a single thing that really sparked my interest as a disabled queer woman living with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and other complex health conditions and disabilities. I've experienced really, like so many people, immense structural barriers to healthcare, intersectional sexism and ableism, coverage gaps, exorbitant out-of-pocket costs on a low income, and more. All of those experiences have really shaped and continue to reaffirm my path in public health and social justice. And now it's really a gift to get to use my legal and public health training to fight to ensure that underserved communities have meaningful access to the care that we need to thrive free from discrimination.
Yeah, wow. So you have a lot of different things, it sounds like, that converged in ways that what we cannot necessarily anticipate, right, in terms of how our career and life passions will develop. But I'm very fascinated. So you mentioned a few things. So with this podcast, we don't assume that the audience necessarily knows everything. So you mentioned intersectional sexism as well as ableism. Can you unpack some of those for the audience and give some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the things that I work on at the National Health Law Program, or NHeLP, have to do with a lot of it has to do with discrimination. So, for example, right now, I'm really passionate about my work to address post-Roe denials of essential care for people with chronic health conditions. Those denials are both sex discrimination, rooted in sexism, discrimination on the basis of pregnancy or a perceived capacity for pregnancy in the future. That's sex discrimination. There's also ableism, discrimination on the basis of disability, in that a lot of those denials are denials of sexual and reproductive health care, but we're also seeing a lot of denials in both abortion ban states and states where abortion remains legal and even protected, like Maryland and New York, where people with chronic health conditions are unable to access prescription drugs that are capable of ending pregnancies, causing birth defects, or preventing pregnancies not because of like a religious refusal or something that would be protected, but because providers and healthcare entities are basically saying, well, the landscape is shifting really rapidly, and so we're just going to not provide this care anymore because these services could be conflated with abortion. And in those instances, that's prohibited sex discrimination, but it's also intersectional discrimination because it's also disability discrimination. And it's discrimination that would not, it's intersectional because it would not be occurring, but for the fact that these individuals are women or perceived as capable of pregnancy, and they also have a disability which needs to be treated. So when we talk about intersectional discrimination, we're talking about discrimination that is happening on the basis of an identity that is more than one thing. Like, so many Black women have horrible experiences in maternal health care and healthcare writ large in this country, not only because they're women and not only because they're Black, but because of that intersectional identity. So it's really important that our legal frameworks take that into account. And in fact, the primary law that I work with at the federal level on the non-discrimination side is Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act. It's the ACA's, it's often known as the Healthcare Rights Law, and it protects against discrimination on the basis of race, sex, national origin, including immigration status, ethnicity, disability, and age, or any combination thereof. And that last piece is so important because it takes into account that people do not live single issue lives.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, we definitely do not, but it's painful, that oftentimes a lot of discussions about these things, especially, in major media, general news, that things are discussed from a singular lens, but they are in fact not. So I appreciate that you saying that. So going back to the thing that we share in common, having both gone to Harvard Chan School of Public Health, how did like the M.P.H and health policy influence your perspective? And I'm curious why you decided to go back and get that. Like, did you feel that that was critical for you to do the work that you're doing, or tell me more about that?
Yeah, I knew going into law school that I wanted to be a policy attorney. I was really interested in addressing issues around human flourishing. And I figured out really early on in like my first semester of law school, I was having really significant barriers to healthcare access and was really, really sick. And that really sort of clarified what I wanted to focus on. But in law school, I had the opportunity to do work with a number of really incredible organizations. And I got really, really interested in very interdisciplinary advocacy, very interested in social epi and, how societal structures shape opportunity for health and well-being. And so recognizing that I wanted to do interdisciplinary work as an advocate, wanted a broader toolkit. I also developed a really strong interest very early on in working in lower resource environments and also supporting advocates in lower resource environments. And based on that, just wanted a more diverse toolkit. And so that's why I decided to go to public health school. And I have found the skills that I gained through public health school so invaluable as a complement to what I was able to get out of law school. Had the opportunity in law school. I did a lot of ACA implementation and internships, and had the opportunity to take a number of health law and policy classes. I was a research assistant to a health law professor, but in public health school, I was able to develop political analysis skills, which are so important for understanding the parameters of change and how to navigate those things as an advocate. I was able to deepen my understanding of social epi. I was able to really learn how to interpret research and know whether a study would be helpful to cite or not in my advocacy. I was able to deepen my understanding of reproductive and sexual health through coursework, which was so invaluable. So I think for me, really broadening my skill set has been so valuable because my career has been so interdisciplinary.
Very fascinating. There's so many different threads that we could go in that direction, but we have such a short amount of time. But I just wanted to kind of call out what you have mentioned several times, social epi or social epidemiology. And I guess for you, like, what are some of the more interesting aspects of social epidemiology that we could potentially provoke the audience's curiosity with?
So much of my advocacy centers on closing coverage gaps and fighting discrimination and doing that through the lens of reproductive justice, which is different than reproductive health, and it's different than reproductive rights. Reproductive justice is a framework that was created by Black women in 1994. We're celebrating 30 years this year in response to the realities that the pro-choice movement had really left women of color and Black women in particular behind in terms of addressing the issues that were most of concern to their communities, such as the Hyde Amendment. Even under Roe, so many people didn't have abortion access. And also, reproductive justice is about so much more than abortion. It's about the right to have children, to not have children, and to raise the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. And in order to get to reproductive justice, we need to ensure that people have access to the power and resources they need for all of those rights to be realized. And so for me, there are so many parallels between social epi research, and I think about Dr. Nancy Krieger's work in particular, and the RJ framework. And I find that especially her work on power in society and intersectionality, and how power shapes health outcomes, how discrimination shapes health outcomes, and so many people have developed research and scholarship on this, has been so crucial to how I understand the science behind the framework, this really important framework that Black women created and that I and other colleagues at the National Health Law Program apply to our sexual and reproductive health advocacy and broader health advocacy. Social epi is like such a critical, it's such a critical field for understanding the science of why that framework is so important as a lens for any health advocacy, including, I would say, especially including advocacy beyond what we think of as like core sexual and reproductive health services. This issue of accessing prescription drugs, for example, to treat chronic health conditions, those are disability services, right? Those are services that are being used to treat chronic health conditions, not to prevent pregnancy or to end pregnancy. But that's a reproductive justice issue when you're limiting someone's ability to thrive because of their perceived potential to have children. That's very oppressive. So I think it's that interdisciplinary background really shapes how I understand and approach these issues.
Oh, awesome. I love that. And I especially just wanted to highlight some of the things that you delineated for the audience, like the differences between reproductive health, reproductive rights, reproductive justice, not the same thing, as well as that interplay of like power, and how it's really leading to certain types of health outcomes. Madeline, because you worked on lots of different policies, is there one policy or two in particular that you worked on that you're particularly proud of? Or conversely, is there one where you were very frustrated with, but like if XYZ were to happen, you think it would have been successful?
That's a great question. I work on policy in a number of different ways. I advocate for policy changes. I provide legal counsel to fellow advocates on, what options are available and what the current legal landscape around an issue is, and have also crafted public policies. So, and some of those policies are vision bills that, you know, a lot of my work involves drafting and rewriting federal legislation, and some of those bills are not expected to pass in the very near future, but are really important, and we hope to get there. And some of the things I've worked on have been implemented. So one thing that I'm very proud of is during my time at the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, I had the opportunity to design and also write regulations implementing Medicaid CHIP and Medicare payment and delivery system reform models to advance access to community-based preventive services, as well as full person care models, and was in the agency at a time where it was really starting to grapple with how do we address the structural determinants of health for our beneficiaries. So I'm very proud of that work. At NHeLP, I, you know, in addition to the legislative work that I do, well, I would say within the legislative work that we do, I'm very proud of the work that we did on the Build Back Better Act, which did not ultimately become law, but a big part of our work on that bill was around closing the Medicaid expansion coverage gap and ensuring that the proposals that Congress was considering really provided equitable coverage and protections that mirrored what individuals would have gotten if their states expanded Medicaid. And that was really important from a racial health equity standpoint, because most of the people in the Medicaid expansion coverage gap are Black, Latina, and other people of color, predominantly in the South. And a lot of the proposals would have provided less coverage, and providing separate and unequal coverage would have been a serious racial health equity issue. So I'm very proud of the work that we did on that to try and guide what that would look like. Although again, it did not ultimately become law. We're currently awaiting the U.S. Centers for, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services final rule on Section 1557, which I mentioned before. This is the ACA's non-discrimination provision. NHeLP did a lot of work with coalition partners to develop template comments for advocates in various sectors, disability, sexual, reproductive, and health, rights and justice, language access, template comments with recommendations on how to strengthen the regulations. And a lot of our recommendations had to do with strengthening the proposed regulatory text on discrimination on the basis of sex and intersectional discrimination. And we're really eager to see what is in the final rule. We expect that this spring. And then the last thing I'll mention very briefly is that sometimes a win is stopping something from happening that would be really bad. And last spring, we successfully fought congressional proposals to impose work requirements on Medicaid coverage, which would have severely hurt access to care for people with low incomes, including sexual and reproductive health care at a time when access to abortion and sexual and reproductive health care is waning. So I'm really proud of the work that our team did on that as well.
I love those reflections, you know, from, I think the first part that resonated with me is your work in policy is not just writing policy or counseling with it, but it's also advocacy. But then, as you said, like there are those that were the outright successes, and the other things were like building the bridge or stacking, up for a win or stopping things from happening. Madeline, I wanted to circle back because I am very curious, with a background, as you said, being a disabled queer woman, do you find that with other individuals that you work with, that people tend to bring more passion or I guess more perspective if they happen to have a very unique intersectional identity? But I'm just very curious, from your perspective.
I think it's so, I really firmly believe that the people closest to the problems are so often closest to the solutions. And I think it can be a superpower when you have lived experience with the problems that you're trying to solve. I think it's been really exciting to see more and more opportunities for people from underserved communities to pursue policy work because underserved communities are exactly who should be shaping policy. So yes, absolutely. And I think that, feeling a personal connection to this work is also, it can be for some people, it can make some people, I think it can be really hard to be navigating administration changes and, changes in the makeup of Congress when how your community is going to be harmed by those outcomes. And I also think that it can be really, really healing when you've experienced, for example, discrimination in our healthcare system to get to be part of working towards solutions and building a more equitable future. So yes, I think, again, like I said, lived experience can absolutely be a superpower in this work.
Yeah, love it, love it. But then not only a superpower, but as you said again, is like a little bit of a caution as well, like the fact that you can be healed but yet be hurt at the same time with all of the work that you're doing. Madeline, if you could give some advice for someone who's very interested in your particular career path, at the intersection of law, public health, social justice, and many other things, what advice would you give for those people?
Yeah, I think the first piece of advice that I give folks is just how essential rest is. Burnout is really common in public interest work. It's really common in public health work. The work that we do is hard, and we're often working uphill for change. And so while there's always more work to be done, I think that resisting grind culture is and making sure that you're carving out space to meet your own needs is really important because we need people who are going to be able to stay in this work long term. And I see burnout so often. I've experienced burnout multiple times, and it's a very common experience, and we need to get away from that culture. Doing a little less today in the name of ensuring that you're meeting your basic needs could mean doing more good over the span of your career. And then I think the other thing is for folks pursuing national work in particular, and especially for folks outside of the South, I would, who aren't from the South or who aren't from the Midwest, states that are dealing with some of the most difficult political climates for change, I would say if you're working at the national level, be very cognizant of your power dynamics with folks who are working on the ground. I want to recognize that the attorneys, advocates, and organizers that I've worked with in the South throughout my career are some of the most visionary, brilliant, and resilient people that I've worked with. They also weather and deal with a lot. And one of the really unique challenges that they deal with is the lack of solidarity from some national advocates. And for example, as a Mississippi advocate, I often saw people outside the South, and especially at the national level, look down on the South, feel that providing assistance, technical assistance, wasn't the best use of their time. Or when something high profile happened, like the 2019 Mississippi ice raids, swoop in and start ordering folks on the ground around, organizers who had worked in these communities for decades, even though the national folks lacked any understanding of the context or what the communities wanted or needed. And so I would say like a few things from that, like understand the importance of solidarity over superiority. And then I think also, again, just understanding how important it is to center the visions, concerns, and leadership of the people closest to the problems. I think all of those are really important to keep in mind if you're pursuing work similar to what I'm doing now.
Oh, awesome. Some other really great quotes, and I'll just tease out a few as I've done before. Yeah, not falling victim to grind culture and to burnout, and then elevating solidarity over superiority. I think I'll end with a final question, Madeline. If you had a magic wand and there were any changes that you could make, public health, social justice, policies within the South, what would those things be?
This is such a difficult question because, of course, there are a laundry, like there's an infinite list of things that need to change. But if I could wave a wand and accomplish just one thing broadly, the thing that I think would have the biggest impact would be I'd want everyone to understand how our liberation struggles are all connected, and how, as Mississippi's civil rights leader Fannie Lou Hamer put it, nobody's free until everybody's free. I believe that shifting the collective's understanding in that way would move the needle in all of our anti-oppression struggles. From a policy standpoint, I'd want to see a strong universal healthcare system in the US that centers reproductive justice and human rights values and is rooted in values of solidarity and collective responsibility. And to ensure that system meets the needs of low-income and underserved communities, I think its architects would need to draw on core elements of Medicaid coverage. As opposed to a Medicare for all model, a Medicaid for all model. And that's because Medicaid has largely comprehensive benefits in a way that Medicare does not, including special services tailored to meet complex health needs that are unique to people with low incomes, such as non-emergency medical transportation that we just don't see in private health plans. We'd want to see strong and enforceable intersectional non-discrimination protections. We'd want to see really strong affordability protections and the many other consumer protections that are unique to Medicaid. But a national healthcare system would really, again, if I could wave a magic wand, need to go further than Medicaid to ensure coverage of essential health services that Medicaid often excludes or does not adequately cover because of discriminatory policies such as the Hyde Amendment, which I mentioned earlier, which severely restricts federal funding in Medicaid and other federally funded programs for abortions. We'd want to see abortion coverage in all circumstances, assisted reproduction coverage, that's things like IVF, fertility preservation, really important for people with sickle cell and other disabilities, home and community-based services, which so many people across the country are on wait lists for, and more. And we also would want to make sure that the system is available to everyone, regardless of income, employment, immigration status, location, age, or any other factors.
Oh, wow. I love that lesson. Lots of really good things there that are very informative because this is not my particular line of work, but I completely agree, Madeline, like the liberation struggles are all the same. It's something that I was thinking about most recently as well. And then interestingly, your comment about Medicaid for all, but then obviously plugging in some of those holes that Medicaid may have. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell the audience before we end?
Oh, I guess I would just say that, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm really grateful for the work that the Boston Congress of Public Health is doing to center social justice in public health work. I think it's really, really important that that lens be applied to public health work. That's something that I feel I'm seeing a little bit more of in public health education.
Mhm.
But I just think that power analysis in any public health practice is just so incredibly important. And for folks who haven't done power analysis work in the past, I would really encourage you to look at Kimberly Crenshaw's work on intersectionality.
Mhm.
Um, and then I also, again, just want to stress, I know that people in this work so incredibly hard, are often underpaid and undervalued. And so I just want to lift back up that reminder for rest and taking care of yourself. Audre Lorde's work is a really great source of what does self-care mean beyond bubble baths? Like, what does self-care really, really mean in social justice work?
Mhm.
And Tricia Hersey's work on rest as resistance has also been a really great source of inspiration, and I can't recommend it enough.
Oh my goodness. I just have like a whole page full of notes of just wonderful quotes that you have rest as resistance and then that power analysis with public health. Thank you so much, Madeline. This has been a wonderful interview. I know I feel more informed about different areas than before, and I know that our audience will as well. So if you want to learn more about Madeline, you can go to bcph.org and connect with her as well through her social media links that are there. Thank you so much again, and stay tuned for the next 40 Under 40 interview.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carpenter.